Welcome to the Orlando Sentinel Editorial Board interview with Orlando attorney Coretta Anthony-Smith, who's one of four Democrats facing off in a June 24th special election for Florida Senate District 15. That seat was vacated when incumbent Senator Geraldine Thompson died on February 13th. This seat, based in West Orange County, includes most of the cities of Winter Garden, Ocoee, Eatonville, and Apopka, as well as the neighborhoods of Paramore, Pine Hills, Washington Shores, and Dr. Phillips. The Democratic primary also includes current state representative LaVon Bracey Davis, former Congressman Alan Grayson, and Randolph Bracey, who served one term in the Senate and challenged Thompson in 2024. The winner of this contest will face Republican Willie Montague in September. Before we get started, one more brief note. In almost every case, the Sentinel interviews candidates jointly. We're trying something new in this race and interviewing the candidates separately. So be sure to watch the interviews with other primary candidates as well. To the best of our ability, we'll be asking each candidate to answer the same questions in about the same time frame. That's because these interviews are not intended to be debates or brawls. Instead, they're a chance for each candidate to talk about what they would hope to accomplish should voters choose them. That's why we ask candidates to refrain from personal attacks and to limit their answers to 1.5 minutes per question. Each candidate will also be given 2 minutes at the end to give a brief closing statement. Joining us today is the Sentinel's executive editor, Roger Simmons.
Hello, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Our opinion editor, Chris Fluker.
Look forward to talking to you.
And I'm Jay Reddick. I'm the Viewpoints editor. I have one more request for Representative Anthony Smith and other candidates. As you answer these questions, I know you're aware that District 15 was drawn to heavily favor a Democratic candidate. However, Florida Democrats have steadily lost ground, both in registration numbers and legislative clout. As we talk about specific issues facing District 15, please talk about the ways that you believe a Democrat could effectively represent this district, which, as we addressed, includes some very low-income parts of Central Florida. And now we'll go to Chris Fluker for the first question.
Well, we have, as of last week, some breaking news. House and Senate leaders have a preliminary budget agreement and have been working on it pretty rapidly this week. That includes a tax cut package that will include an elimination of sales tax on commercial leases, multiple permanent sales tax exemptions and that are aimed at families, and about $1 billion in debt reduction and additions to the State Reserve Fund. We started these interviews before the nuts and bolts negotiations started, so we want to mostly talk about the tax cut package. Would you give us your impression of those proposals and which you feel are best for Floridians?
I believe in the sales tax cuts for commercial leases. And one of the reasons why I believe in that is because of some of the, and let me back up for a second. Some of the tax cuts as it relates to commercial leases, I do believe in. I may be a little bit biased because I do own a commercial space for which my law firm is a part of. However, I am a small business owner as well. So the tax cuts help to the extent that I could offset some of that to help my employees in other ways that I would not be able to help them. For example, in helping them purchase health insurance and helping give raises. So when we talk about reducing commercial lease spaces, we also have to remember, the taxes for commercial lease spaces, we also have to remember that it's not just for big companies. A lot of times when you think about commercial leases, you think of a huge company, but in fact, a lot of them go for small businesses. So when you have a small business like mine, we have about 15 employees, that type of tax incentive means a great deal to us. That type of tax incentive means a great deal to us. And we can use that money in other ways. I understand that some of the tax cuts may impact other resources that are available to us. I have not seen the entire budget, and I'm not familiar with all of it, that how they're going to offset some of those things. But I do believe in some of the cuts that have been made and promoted.
There has been debate, as you've watched, between some people who are backing more extensive sales tax cuts beyond what's currently proposed, or, and alternatively, property tax cuts. Which of those two options do you think overall is more fair for residents of District 15?
Well, I've been looking at this in detail, and I believe that if we cut sales tax, that will maybe overall benefit everyone. However, I know that the property taxes are a huge source of discourse for a lot of the middle class families here in District 15. However, we do have to be careful that if we cut property taxes, we don't raise taxes in another area, which is something that we need to consider when we're talking about the property tax cuts. So it really depends on how deep the cuts are going to be and whether or not they're going to raise taxes elsewhere. So I would take that into consideration. However, the sales tax, that's across the board for everyone. So I do believe that that will probably benefit the overall district. However, I am cognizant that people are looking for reductions in property taxes, including myself. So I understand that that's an issue. However, we just need to make sure that we balance it to make sure, like I said, that if we cut here, then it's not going to increase taxes somewhere else. However, I would defer to like the financial planners and the auditors that work on that to make sure that that's something that can be accomplished in the best interest of the district.
Thank you for that answer. Switching gears a bit, wanted to ask you about tourist development taxes. I know that that's been a political football for a very long time. Do you support giving local communities more flexibility in terms of how that they use and spend tourist development dollars?
I do believe that communities and local community leaders do need an input on that. However, Orlando tourism is a huge financial resource for Orlando. That's the reason why I moved to Orlando. That's the reason why I chose to raise my family here. I don't want to cut the marketing dollars such that, you know, it has an effect 5 or 10 years from now where we haven't necessarily marketed Orlando like we should have. And now we're facing, you know, a lack of tourism here. I understand that people think that the tourism dollars, you know, that they just get this big pot of money, but in researching and looking at Visit Orlando, they also look at how the airport works, you know, making sure when people come here that they feel safe, making sure that when people come here, they have the available resources. For example, you know, to make sure that of late that they may not be arrested. And a lot of people have like these concerns, even if you just Google it, about coming to Florida. So a lot of those tourist development taxes can be used to educate people as it relates to Florida too, because a lot of people are getting turned off about coming to our state and they may be afraid to come to our state. So I do believe that the TDT taxes need to primarily stay focused on that, as well as educating our citizens and our tourists that come here about the benefits of Orlando.
One of the toughest parts of budget negotiations is tied to state-funded local projects. That's a double challenge because first you have to find a way to get your projects in the budget. And as we previously mentioned, Democrats have some challenges there. And secondly, they've got to make sure that they do their best to have those projects survive the governor's veto pen. If you are elected, which projects do you see as priorities for District 15, and what would you advocate to have in the budget for this district?
So in just reviewing stuff, I see where the government has said, okay, as far as expanding Sunrail, that was a $6 million investment that needed to be had just to look at the feasibility, the infrastructure, to make sure Sunrail expansion can be had. So I think when we look at things like that for Sunrail expansion to go to like the Orlando airport, that's very important. So I would like to see more projects like that, as well as affordable housing. We have the Live Local Act, which I believe goes in the right direction. However, I believe that if we work more with workforce housing and tax incentives, that we may be able to get some from the state as it relates to employers, medium-sized employers, things that are bipartisan in nature and that will benefit our community as a whole. It has a greater chance of passing. Furthermore, a lot of those projects are very important to us. When you look at affordable housing, workforce housing is extremely important. So I believe projects like the Live Local Act can help us, and we need to work on bipartisan issues that will help benefit our community. And I would like to expand affordable housing like the Live Local to not only focus on, because we have projects like Sadowski that kind of focuses on lower class, but I do believe we need other projects that focus on middle class or working class issues as well, so that they too can have affordable housing.
Thank you. One issue that did eventually gain agreement between DeSantis, the House, and the Senate was an aggressive new immigration policy. I've got two questions on that. Please give us your assessment of the legislation that was passed, first from a public policy or moral standpoint.
That's a tough one because I really wish some of that would not have passed from a moral standpoint. However, a majority of our legislatures were in favor of it. I think that as it relates to immigration, that we have a lot of work to do. I don't believe that we're going in the right direction. I know that will be tough to take an opposite road or to get anything accomplished that is the negative side of what they've already passed or some type of opposition to it. But from a moral standpoint, I do oppose a lot of what's happening here in the state of Florida. And I'm sorry, Jay, can you repeat the second part of your question? I got so caught up about my morality that I kind of forgot about the second part of your question, if you don't mind.
Oh, no, I understand. My second part of my question is actually sort of my next question, but the first part was just give us your assessment of the legislation from a public policy or moral standpoint. So I believe you've answered that.
Okay.
So I can move on to the next.
Okay.
Which is basically about the fiscal impact of the immigration plan, particularly with local governments who are now apparently obligated to house and care for people suspected of being in Florida illegally. I know there may be some court challenges down the line for that, but should Florida's plan survive those court challenges, how do you allocate those costs fairly?
And I think that that's going to be very difficult for the local governments to allocate the resources, because it's one thing to have an idea about what you want to do, but to actually implement and enforce that idea is something completely different. I'm not sure where our county is going to come up with the money to do that. We already have a problem in making sure about the unhoused and making sure that they are taken care of. I was just at a Apopka City Council meeting yesterday, and they were focused a lot about trying to implement for different resources for the unhoused, how they would now take on additional individuals like immigrants. It seems to be we're biting off right now more than we can chew. And honestly, I don't know how they're going to accomplish that when right now we can barely, and we're not adequately dealing with our unhoused. And so to now take on another group of people and try to support them when we are already having a harder time supporting our own residents, it may be difficult.
All right, switching gears, there's been considerable anxiety over the role the federal government might play in future emergency management challenges, as well as recovery from major storm damage or other natural disasters. And we're in the middle of the start of hurricane season right now. What do you think the legislature should do to be sure Florida is ready to support its residents during, hopefully, we won't have one, but if there is a catastrophic event?
Yes, and so I've just as a citizen of the state of Florida, I've been worried about that, especially when they talk about eliminating or reducing FEMA. I have been talking about disaster preparedness, that we need to educate our citizens about what we need to do in case of a storm, because right now we're already seeing significant rain, and so that's probably already affecting people. And then we have insurance challenges that are coming about. So I do think that we need to invest more in our first responders. We need to invest more in educating our people to prepare for disasters, and not even just a disaster, but also just the storms and how they may impact you and what you can do, and maybe offering sandbags when we know that it's going to be, a serious storm or flooding that people can always, pick up. But I am extremely concerned with the federal government and them possibly reducing or taking away the resources that FEMA provides. And then we would, as a state, be responsible for picking all of that up. So one of my top priorities, and I think I've said this before, is investing in first responders, doing more neighbor policing. And it's just in case there is a storm that, nobody's out there looting, nobody's taking advantage. You have your neighbors who can always look out for you. And also, like I just said, educating people about disaster preparedness, not just relief, because relief comes after the storm. And we will need help after those storms, not only preparing, but also after it already occurs.
And kind of related to that, and it goes along with something you mentioned too, Florida's property insurance market has shown little signs of recovery, and many are denying and delaying claims of Florida citizens at a record pace. What do you think the legislature should do to make insurance more reliable and affordable for Floridians?
I think that they need to make insurance companies more accountable. I think that a lot of the, I'm not really sure if the public's aware about HB 837, but that was a lot of tort reform. It rolled back and eroded a lot of rights of the citizens. I think we need to roll some of that back because it afforded a lot of protections for insurance companies where they're no longer held accountable. They don't have to be transparent. They're able to take our premiums and they're able to not pay claims with little to no repercussions. And that's a sad state that they can do something like that. And we, as citizens of the state of Florida, have no ability to really counter that. So I think that they need to be held accountable and that it needs to be more transparent as it relates to their actions, their profits. As we were seeing earlier this year, while they were saying that they were losing money and needed to withdraw from the state, in fact, their subsidiaries were making billions of dollars in profit. So clearly there is a lack of transparency. And then when they got rid of the attorney's fees provision, and the House even adopted this year, maybe a prevailing party, which will be a two-way attorney fee street to make sure that everybody's, working on the same page, that you keep homeowners accountable as well as insurance companies. And that was rejected by the Senate. What never came up for hearing. So I do believe that we need to prioritize accountability and transparency so that the citizens and the legislators know what's going on.
I wanted to move to an issue that I think many Floridians are paying attention to, and there is some division among Democrats as to how they view the issue of state-funded education vouchers that allow students to attend private school using state dollars toward their tuition. Do you support the state's current policy that offers vouchers to any family that requests them?
Well, I think we need to look at where the vouchers are going, because some of the private schools don't have some of the same requirements that state schools have as it relates to testing, moving on to the same grade, moving up a level. So that's what concerns me as well, is that we're using the state funded dollars, but we don't know if we're going to have state responsible schools. And I feel like, just for an example, I had a friend of mine, he put his kids in a private school, and then when they got ready to go to a public high school, they were not ready. The whole time they were making straight A's. And I just use it as an example. They were making straight A's. He had no idea. He thinks his kids are doing great. And I think that that's a lull that we may all fall into, because you think private is better. And that's not necessarily the case. And so I think if we're going to use state money, they need to be some type of requirements on those school systems to make sure that they meet the minimum, at least, standards that are required under Florida law.
And I wanted to follow up with that. Most Florida children will remain in public schools. And we've heard a lot in the past several years about the concerns with the quality of Florida's public schools. What are your biggest priorities to maintain the state's constitutional requirement for a system of free, public, high-quality schools?
I think we need to incentivize our teachers too, and we need to make sure we have quality educators who care. My mom was a teacher, my aunt, her sister was a teacher. I have like a ton of aunts that are teachers, and the ones that care always do typically the best job, just like anybody else. If you care about your job, you do a really, you're usually really good at it. So I think that we need to invest in our teachers. We need to make sure they have resources. Too many times we hear about teachers having to reach into their own pockets to pay for supplies, to pay for extra things that they believe will benefit their classrooms. And I think that the state needs to take some of that away from our teachers. They're already not making very much money. And then to have them have to come out of pocket for resources and for things that their kids need just to help them with their learning, I think needs to be a state priority, not just for teachers alone. So I do think we need to invest in our teachers. We need to invest in our teachers' aides if the school has them. And we also need to make sure that the school has enough resources to meet the demand that the teachers require.
So 6 years ago, there was a poll, and many Floridians believe that the safety and health of the state's water supply was one of the top issues in the state. Today, water quality seems to draw little attention, but most sources agree that little has improved in the past 6 years. What specific steps would you push the legislature to consider when it comes to the health of Florida's rivers, lakes, marshes, and other surface water, as well as the underground aquifer that supplies most of the state's drinking water?
So I think that when we look at, we need to enforce more of our lakeshore protections, the permits, making sure that we get adequate and healthy ecosystems as it relates to our lakes and our waters. You're right. I believe it was a big issue a few years ago, and it's slowly tapered off. I'm not sure if because there are other issues that have risen to the top, but we need to promote water conservation. We need to promote, when it comes to landscaping, to make sure that they're using and investing in the type of green landscaping that's required, or in the infrastructure that we need to make sure that we have, healthy lakes. Orlando is filled with lakes. We're inland, but we have a lot of lakes, and we need to make sure that those lakes are protected and that the permits and what's it called? The ordinances, kind of brain fart for a second there. The permits, the ordinances are followed through, and that they are enforced as much as possible. And I'm not sure that we're continuing to do that. And I think that we need to put that on our list of priorities to make sure that we have sustainable water for the future. Yeah, I'll end it there.
Thank you for that. Another issue that certainly is at the top of many people's lists is healthcare. What more, in your view, what more can Florida do and the legislature do to ensure that state residents have access to affordable, accessible healthcare?
I don't think that we do enough right now for access to affordable healthcare. It seems like as it relates to the very poor, or if you're in the lower socioeconomic, but if you're in the middle or working class, it is extremely difficult to obtain health insurance that is in fact affordable. So I think that we need to, I know that there's the whole expand Medicaid for all. I don't know that that's going to really fly here in the state of Florida, but I think that maybe if we can incentivize some of our employers to maybe give health insurance to some of the residents, especially smaller businesses, things like that. I know for me, we do provide health insurance to our employees where we pay for the majority part of the premiums. But if we could enforce, or if we could make health insurance more attractive to smaller employers, because it's extremely expensive. But if we could do something to make smaller employers offer health insurance to their employees, I think that would go a long way, as well as having some sort of system, where there would be a right, at least to places like Orange Blossom Family Health Center. Like, that's one of the sources of healthcare here in the state of Florida. If we could have more facilities like that around, that people could, at least if you're having a cold, if you're not feeling well, if you think you have COVID, that they can walk into and get services that were free or very low cost?
We have covered a tremendous amount of ground. We did promise that we'd get you out of here in a timely fashion. But we have so many other questions we could definitely ask you. But before we go to your closing statement, I wanted to address the people who are going to be watching this video for a minute. We'd like to remind our readers that the Sentinel does plan to make an endorsement in this race, but we believe District 15 voters are best served if they do their own research as well. That includes checking out each candidate's website, their social media, taking opportunities to see them in person, and of course, following our excellent news coverage. We also want to remind our readers that endorsement decisions are made by the editorial board alone, with no input from or consultation with our colleagues on the news side. That's something important for our readers to know. The candidates in this race, I can tell you with sincerity, are all working hard to earn your vote. And we will expect them to take other opportunities to reach out to you. Take a good look at each of them. Decide which of them best represents your values as a voter and a resident of District 15. And most importantly, remember that whether you choose to vote by mail or at an early voting site or in person on election day, the most important thing that you can do in this race is to vote. And this is an unusual opportunity. It's out of our normal election schedule, but it is an extremely important race for Florida, and one that we hope you take the time to register in. And with that, we would like to invite Ms. Anthony-Smith to make her closing statement as to why voters should choose her in this race.
Thank you. Before I begin my closing statement, I just want to remind voters that early voting starts June 14th through June 22nd, and the actual election day is June 24th. So make sure, as Chris indicated, that you at least take the time, no matter what candidate, that you actually do vote, because your voice does matter. And with that being said, I would like to just say I am seeking to be the Democratic candidate for Senate District 15. I care about the community. I am not a career politician. I'm just like you all. I want something new. I want change. I am a trial lawyer. So I've always had to work across the aisles to get benefits for my clients. I've had to negotiate. I've had to mediate. I've had to advocate both for and against individuals, right or wrong, depending upon, what side of the issue that it falls upon. But at the end of the day, what you can have in me is a candidate who will be transparent and who will be accessible. I will offer to have my door open at any time to discuss issues. Now, I don't know everything. I don't know a lot, but what I will tell you is that I will surround myself with people who do know. When we talk about, how to resolve a lot of the issues that have been brought up today, we have people who that's where their expertise lies, in how to make sure that we have adequate drinking water, sustainable energy, to make sure that our issues are properly funded, to make sure that we understand the feasibility of any type of issues that we have or any type of solutions that we try to implement. Because if you have an idea, but it can't be implemented, then it's nothing but a piece of paper. So what I want to tell you is that I'm about reaching real solutions, not just putting things on paper. And for that reason, and the reason because I've been advocating for people for years, and I have one reason that I'm running in this race. It's only because I care. It's not for money. It's not for any type of accolade. I am a 26-year attorney. At this point in my life, I could be about to retire. However, I've chosen not to do that, but instead try to give back to my community in the best way that I know how. And that's what I'm doing here today, is giving back. So please vote for me on June 24th.